I invite the member for Chilliwack-Kent to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize y'all's neighborhood. And whosoever shall be found without the soul for getting down must stand and face the hounds of hell and rot inside a corpse's shell. The foulest stench is in the air, the funk of 40,000 years. The grisly ghouls from every tomb are closing in to seal your doom. And though you fight to stay alive, your body starts to shiver, for no mere mortal can resist the evil of the thriller.
Introductions by members. Minister of Forests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us in the members' gallery this morning is the Consul General of the United States, Mr. James DeHart. Accompanying him is Anna Himelech, a political economic officer at the consulate. Consul General DeHart is here on his first official visit to Victoria. Later this morning, the Minister of State for Trade and I will meet with him. This afternoon, he will have lunch with you, Mr. Speaker. Following that, he will meet with the Minister of Finance and then Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor. Would the House please make both our guests feel very welcome?
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present a message from Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor.
Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor transmits here with Bill number 42, entitled Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act number 3, 2023, and recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Minister.
I move that the bill be introduced and read a first time now. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce Bill 42, the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act number 3, 2023. This bill amends the following statutes: Supreme Court Act, Low Carbon Fuels Act, Protected Areas of British Columbia Act, Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act, Residential Tenancy Act, North Island Coast Development Initiative Trust Act, Northern Development Initiative Trust Act, Southern Interior Development Initiative Trust Act, Local Government Act. This bill also makes consequential amendments to a number of other statutes. I'll be pleased to elaborate on the nature of these amendments during the second reading of this bill.
Member, the question is the first reading of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading at the next sitting of the House after today.
You have heard the question. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Madam Clerk.
Statements by members.
Member for Peace River South.
Mary Miller was born April 30th in Doe River area, just north of Rolla, British Columbia, a small farming community, and she spent pretty much her entire life there. She was one of the more passionate people that I ever had the pleasure of meeting, and it came especially with her love and support for the region and for the agricultural sector that helped develop and grow the Peace region. When I first was elected as MLA for Peace River South, one of the very first people to contact me and to meet with me was Mary and her husband John, who sadly passed away in 2018. Mary sat across from me, she looked me in the eye, and she said to me, "Now that you represent me, you better be representing the farmers and ranchers in this area, the same people that helped build this beautiful part of the province." So as you can guess, Mary never shied away from expressing her opinions and standing up for what she believed in. Mary had a long career as a school teacher in Rolla and was a member of the Rolla Women's Institute for her entire life. It's probably safe to say that there's no one who didn't know Mary in that region because of her involvement and support of always making sure people knew about Rolla and the people who founded that area, like Mary herself. After retirement, Mary's next passion turned to her grandkids, helping out and supporting them in all of their sporting activities. Another passion of Mary's, though, was her constant battles with the oil and gas sector, reminding them always that they had to respect the land that the farmers use, but it was always a bit of a joke within her family considering all 4 of her sons worked in the oil and gas sector. On September 22nd, 2023, Mary sadly passed away, leaving a huge hole in her family and in our community. And a celebration of Mary's life will be held this Saturday, 2 p.m. in the Rolla Hall. I will always cherish all of my times that I've spent with Mary, our meetings, and our little battles, and I send condolences to her family and her friends. Mary was a force, and she will always be remembered. Thank you.
Member for Vancouver Fraserview.
Mr. Speaker, today is Halloween. I'm not going to speak about something scary, but something that's interesting and important. I'm going to talk about washrooms, particularly a washroom in this building, the Legislative Assembly. Do you know that in the 1990s, there wasn't a single women's washroom on the same floor as this chamber? There were 4 washrooms on this floor, but they were all for men. So women demanded change and management finally relented. One men's room was converted to women's use by shutting down the water sprinkler to the urinals. Plastic flowers were still in vogue then, so they put them in the urinal to pretty them up. As dust started to gather on the flowers and the plastic faded with time, the flowers become unsightly. A more permanent and practical solution was implemented by building a full-height wooden enclosure around the urinals. This was what I saw when Michelle Mangal, former MLA for Nelson Crescent, took me for a tour of the women's washroom in the legislation back in 2017 when I first got elected. One memorable incident Michelle told me was that one MLA dropped her cell phone and it ended up in the urinal despite having the wooden enclosure because the enclosure has a gap on the bottom where it meets the floor. However, on that tour, Michelle didn't show me the location of the men's room on this floor, so that one former PMA Christy Clark called the division vote. I almost missed it because I was in the men's room on the 3rd floor. 2 weeks ago, the BC Building Trade visited the legislature and met with MLA. Among other topics, they discussed the need for better washroom facility for construction workers. They pointed out, I quote, an additional consequential benefit of providing improved washroom facility in construction is an increased level of support for underrepresented groups who might be considering construction trades as a vocation. Given my experience in washroom matter, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Richmond North Centre.
I rise today to share a truly heartwarming experience I had yesterday, which is a shining example of the spirit of inclusion and innovation in our great province. On October 30th, I have the pleasure of attending the grand opening of Paper Planes Cafe at YVR Airport in Richmond in my riding. This cafe is not just another addition to one of Canada's major airports. It is a groundbreaking initiative that deserves recognition and celebration. Paper Planes Cafe is born out of a partnership with the Pacific Autism Family Network. It showcases the power of collaboration and the commitment to creating opportunities for everyone in our community, regardless of their abilities. Paper Planes Cafe is a unique approach to employment and training. Individuals with diverse abilities are provided with valuable work experience and paid a living wage while undergoing a 6-month training period. This period serves as a launching pad, allowing PAFN to collaborate with various companies in the community to find this individual suitable and fulfilling employment. In a world that is often marked by barriers and limitations, this initiative symbolizes progress, unity, and the limitless potential of every individual. It stands as a pioneer, not just at YVR Airport, but as the first of its kind in any Canadian airport. As British Columbians, we must always work to ensure that no one is left behind and that everyone has the opportunity to shine in their own unique way. I see how Paper Planes Cafe helps achieve this. I hope this example inspires us all to better and do more for inclusivity in our communities. I look forward to witnessing the positive impact Paper Planes Cafes will have on the lives of the people it serves and the broader community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for North Vancouver Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the unceded territories of the Lekwungen people, the Esquimalt and the Songhees, and that I work, live and learn in my beautiful riding of North Vancouver Seymour, situated in the unceded territory of the Coast Salish, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. When I think of Halloween, I think of pumpkins that become wonderful orange jack-o'-lanterns. This past Sunday, I had the joy of distributing small pumpkins to young and old people who were traveling through the plaza at Parkgate Mall. These people were on a variety of quests, all of which could be met within walking distance of their homes. Some were attending the North Van Rec Centre where there were drop-in sports such as badminton and pickleball, access to a fitness gym, and parties being attended by excited kids in costumes. Others came out of the library. One school-aged girl with so many books she couldn't carry them on her own. She proudly pointed out the ones she had chosen for her little sister at home. There were seniors making their way home with today's groceries today to nearby condominiums or to the co-op. A Ukrainian grandmother who spoke very limited English with 2 grandchildren who chattered fluently. A father and son duo that arrived from Hong Kong 6 months ago and were enchanted by getting free pumpkins. It was a lovely day, and the nearby coffee shop had customers at all the outdoor tables, enjoying the crisp autumn sun and catching up on the news of the day or the week. As I watched kids and their parents choosing the right pumpkin and adding decoration if they wished, I realized that I felt an overwhelming gratitude that Parkgate, like many other communities in North Vancouver and British Columbia, has created a safe, accessible, and welcoming intergenerational space for children to play, families to gather, and seniors to meet. A place where everyone is welcome, always. Have a safe and happy Halloween. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Vancouver-Langara.
2 weeks ago, across party lines, we made speeches in this House to condemn Hamas for their barbaric and violent terrorist crimes against humanity on October 7th. Throughout the past 3 weeks, members of the Jewish community have expressed to me their fears and how they feel betrayed and very alone in the world right now. Thankfully, many people with platforms, including elected representatives, have gone out of their way to show them that they are not alone. I want to recognize one member in particular across the aisle, the Minister of Advanced Education, for her unwavering support for Israel and that the burden that she carries. As I acknowledged last Saturday at Beth Israel Synagogue in Vancouver, I've seen the heinous comments, threats, and bullying online that she and others have received. It's why, no matter our partisan stripes, we must all loudly stand behind those who use this platform for good and show the Jewish community that they are not alone. Because sadly, those threats are not just on social media and in MLA inboxes. I'm deeply troubled by what I've seen recently in schools, on university and college campuses, and on BC streets. Hate and anti-Semitism is either being promoted or allowed to fester without challenge. Now is the time to push back. Now is the time to support our Jewish friends and neighbors. We must stand with them and condemn incitement of violence in the rallies that we continue to see in Vancouver and ensure that the criminal code provisions, including against willful promotion of hatred and anti-Semitism, are enforced. The Jewish community has given us so much in this province. We owe it to them and to our society to do all we can to stamp out this hate and anti-Semitism and ensure no Jewish child is afraid of going to school, no Jewish student is afraid of attending UBC, and no Jewish person anywhere in this province feels unsafe or unwelcome. Anything less is a failure in our responsibilities as elected representatives in our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Nelson Creston.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. First of all, I would like to wish everyone in British Columbia a very happy Halloween. As Parliamentary Secretary for Tourism, my role is to encourage exploration, learning, and play in a variety of forms. All of us in this room would agree that play is necessary and important aspect of cognitive, physical, and emotional development for children. We encourage children to play. For many adults, play may be perceived as silly, unproductive, and time-consuming. Some may even discourage adults to play. For many adults, we can feel boxed in by the expectations and pressures of adulthood. But let's not take ourselves too seriously. There are a number of benefits to play for adults, including improved stress management and an improvement in our well-being. Play offers a reprieve from the chaos and challenges to connect us with a key part of ourselves that gets lost in the responsibility of adulthood. People play in different ways. Karaoke sounds like a blast to one person, but a nightmare to another. And celebrating Halloween is a form of play. So for everyone in British Columbia celebrating Halloween this year, I hope the experience is safe, sparks joy, and improves your overall well-being. I would like to thank my colleagues who dressed up as Barbie this year for the best holiday of the year, and to our Premier for giving me his blessing to organize the group caucus Halloween costume again this year, essentially encouraging play. And you know what they say, MLAs that play together, stay together. Across British Columbia on this Halloween, let's all embrace play and embark on the joyful adventure together that celebrates creativity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, life has never been more expensive than under this NDP Premier. Well, the NDP runs record-setting inflationary deficits, family budgets are tighter than ever. People are stretched thin, juggling record-high housing, food and fuel costs, and they deserve a break. Yet, instead of providing relief, this Premier is on track to balloon the carbon tax from $30 a tonne in 2017 when they formed government to a crippling $170 a tonne by the end of this decade. So my question to the Premier is straightforward. Will the Premier confirm his plans to hike the carbon tax to $170 a tonne as laid out in his own budget?
Premier.
Thank you. I want to thank the member from Nelson Creston for a 2-minute statement for help with our Halloween costume this year. And I have to admit, I was puzzled. You know, what is the Leader of the Opposition dressed as this year? And it turns out he's dressed as a weather vane, Honourable Speaker. Member.
Members, every member must refrain from name calling, please.
It's hard to imagine that the same member who rolled out his announcement this morning, rolling back the carbon tax, is the same person that said, quote, "I am actually very proud of the leadership role we've taken in the carbon tax. I think that if you accept that climate change is an issue, then pricing carbon is absolutely the right way to deal with it." Honourable Speaker, obviously the member is abandoning that position. I look forward to all the details of his position. And the member is well aware of the fact that pricing carbon is the right way to deal with climate change. He's just lost the courage of his convictions.
Leader of the Official Opposition, supplemental.
Well, let's be really clear about something here, Mr. Speaker. It's this Premier who has flip-flopped on his promise of affordability. And I would remind the Premier that it was his NDP that campaigned against the carbon tax when it was introduced at $10 a tonne. And then Mr. Premier did a double backflip to actually now say they want to increase it to $170 a ton, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, in 2012, while I was finance minister, I froze the carbon tax at $30 a ton, and subsequent BC Liberal governments maintained that freeze until 2017, when the NDP formed government. And what has happened since then? Well, they've more than doubled the carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier's own budget documents show that he plans to triple the carbon tax on home heating, costing homeowners nearly $900 a year. So my question to the Premier, after already dramatically jacking up this tax, will the Premier confirm his next move is to more than triple the carbon tax on home heating? Hear, hear.
Mr. Premier.
Remember how quickly he forgets when he was finance minister. When they sat on this side of the House, a family that earned $100,000 used to pay $7,473 in taxes. They now pay $4,948. That's a 34%. Families that earn $80,000 a year, a 56% net reduction. The member called removing the tolls a profound public policy mistake. Honourable Speaker, if he gets back on this side of the House, you know what he's going to do? He's going to reverse what he called a mistake. He's going to put the tolls back on the bridge. It'll be the same guy that increased the MSP on families.
Members, please, calm down.
And maybe he'll reverse himself on that too, Honourable Speaker. But what I can't tell is what this member stands for anymore. He said he supported the Surrey police transition. Conservatives said they were against it. He reversed his position. He said he voted for the short-term rental legislation. Conservatives said they were against it. Then he voted against it too, Honourable Speaker. He said he supported harm reduction. The Conservatives said they were against it. He reversed himself again. One day his caucus says...
Members, please.
One day his caucus says he supports harm reduction. The next day they say he doesn't. He spent 15 years saying he was proud of the carbon tax, and today, Honourable Speaker, he's not.
Leader of the Official Opposition, second supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what leadership looks like. It looks... Oh, this is the best part. This is the best part.
Members.
You haven't heard the best part yet.
Members.
Hold your applause for just a few seconds longer.
Members, let's hear the question, please.
I'll tell you what leadership looks like, Mr. Speaker. It looks like the Premier of Saskatchewan who's fighting for affordability, a Premier who is standing for working people, no carbon tax on home heating. That's real leadership, Mr. Speaker. British Columbians cannot afford to pay even more in the midst of a cost of living crisis. And rather than adopting sensible, pragmatic solutions, this Premier doubles down on yearly hikes that will hammer the final nails in the coffins of affordability here in British Columbia. So my question to the Premier is a straightforward one. Why won't this Premier give British Columbians a break from his punishing carbon tax grab?
Premier.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. I guess the theme of the past couple weeks has been Liberal leaders facing difficult poll results, flip-flopping on the carbon tax.
Members, please.
I understand the members under a lot of pressure from the Conservative Party.
You think that's funny?
But standing up after the summer we had, for British Columbia to be a leader on climate change is an important thing. And his abandonment of that under pressure is exactly what's going to happen if he gets on this side of the House. He will go after British Columbians again for every little MSP fee, every little toll, so he can give tax cuts to the big corporations and the wealthy 2% who don't need the help. You know how I know, Honourable Speaker? Because he's done it before. And now he has the nerve to stand up on that side of the House and say he's on the side of families, when we're the side that cut taxes for families by up to 50%, Honourable Speaker? Give me a break. The province needs principled leadership.
Members.
The province needs principled leadership.
Members.
It's hard to stand strong, Honourable Speaker. It's hard to stand strong. But I encourage the members to visit with the member that used to sit here in 2012, because at least he knew what he stood for. I have no idea what that man stands for.
Opposition House Leader.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, other premiers are standing up and they're fighting for their citizens. So take Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario. Here in British Columbia, we have a premier who sticks his head in the sand and isn't standing up and doing anything to drive affordability for British Columbia. That's the issue. And let's make no mistake about it, this is a provincial carbon tax that this premier controls, period. And in BC, middle-class families pay the most in net carbon tax anywhere in the country. But it gets worse, Mr. Speaker. Government documents confirm the NDP's Clean BC plan will actually shrink the provincial economy by $28 billion. Also shrinking family paychecks to the tune of $11,000 per household per year, a cost which this premier and this government have not shared with British Columbians. What people want is a premier who stands up and fights for them instead of this premier who refuses to do so. The premier could start today by removing the NDP's carbon tax on home heating, plain and simple. Will the premier do that today?
Minister of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, you know, for 15 years, the BC United has enthusiastically supported the carbon tax. And in fact, we've heard the Leader of the Opposition has called it his proudest moment yet. So now he wants to question this. He wants to abandon the principles. He wants to question whether the climate crisis is costing people and businesses. Instead of helping people do the right thing to fight climate change, to make it more affordable to do so, he wants to walk back on climate action. So, Mr. Speaker, what are they going to cut? Are they going to cut the $900 that families are receiving each year through the Climate Action Tax Credit? Are they going to cut the millions of dollars of carbon tax that are invested back into industry to reduce emissions and increase competitiveness? Members? Mr. Speaker, are they going to cut the rebates for heat pumps, for electric vehicles, for better doors and windows, for better insulation, for people to make it more affordable to fight the devastating impacts of climate change? Mr. Speaker, our government is going to continue to make progress on our climate targets while reducing costs for people. That's what British Columbians expect of this government, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Opposition House Leader Supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, the saddest part of all of this is that BC used to be a climate leader. This government has actually relinquished British Columbia's leadership role on the world stage. When you look at the results, and the results are really what matter, emissions are going up, and British Columbia is now the least affordable jurisdiction in all of Canada. Terrible results. That's the combo. But again, this is a reality. The NDP's Clean BC plan has become the Kill BC plan, plain and simple. It's going to kill jobs, it's going to kill paychecks, and it's going to kill any hope of affordability in this province for an entire generation. The government's own numbers, these are the government's documents, the government's numbers admit that their policies are going to shrink the economy by $28 billion and set real family incomes back a decade to the tune of $11,000 per family per year. That said, there's an opportunity today to provide relief on home heating and to put BC on a level playing field with the rest of Canada. So again, to the Premier, very simple question. Will the Premier stand up, show one iota of leadership and remove the provincial carbon tax on home heating?
Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. People who know me know that I do my best to stay fit, but even I know that doing repeated backflips is just dangerous for your health. Honourable Speaker, Honourable Speaker, Honourable Speaker. Okay.
Members, let's continue with the question period. All right. Minister has the floor.
Well, I'm glad I'm providing some entertainment for the opposition, but their claims that the Business Council has a credible analysis of Clean BC is neither correct nor funny. So, the opposition House Leader has raised this twice now as a bit of a throwaway in question. Let me just say that credible economists, as recently as Monday, in Business in Vancouver, have pointed out the flaws in BCBC's analysis. They took numbers from documents on a government website completely out of context. The context is,
Members,
I'd be happy to explain it to the opposition if they care to listen.
Members in the opposition, you're wasting your own time. You're losing your own time. Minister will continue.
The comparison in the Clean BC documents were of the Clean BC plan against no climate plan whatsoever, which is what existed in 2017 prior to a change in government. If this House is serious about climate action, this House and the opposition need to realize that not only do we need to lower emissions, not only do we need a climate plan, we cannot afford to miss the economic opportunities in clean energy, in clean technology, none of which was factored into the statistics that BCBC offered British Columbians. It's misleading, it's wrong, and it's not helpful.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. If this House was serious about climate action, this government would take the $30 a tonne cap on the climate pricing off of the biggest polluter in this province, which is LNG Canada, and return that money to people who need it to make it. The other thing this House has not been serious, or this government has not been serious about, is species at risk. The spotted owl is the symbol of BC's failure to protect at-risk wildlife. Only one wild-born spotted owl remains in a forest in BC, the only place in Canada where this species has ever been found. The federal government was prepared to issue a rare emergency order under Canada's Species at Risk Act to protect the spotted owl's critical habitat in a cruel twist. It turns out that the Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship and his staff lobbied intently to dissuade the federal cabinet from issuing a spotted owl emergency order. A BC cabinet minister briefing document obtained under Freedom of Information states that the emergency order would have, quote, significant impacts on forest sector jobs and provincial revenue, and Ottawa should back away from issuing the order even when a species is at risk of extirpation. My question, through you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Water, Land, Resource Stewardship. How is arguing against protecting habitat for the last spotted owl considered stewardship?
Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her question. Promoting the recovery and reintroduction of northern spotted owls into British Columbia is a key priority for our government, and that's why we took three key important steps. First, in partnership with First Nations and the federal government, we established the world's first ever captive breeding program for spotted owl. Currently, there are 31 owls that exist at the breeding center. Second, we protected more than 280,000 hectares of critical habitat, old-growth habitat, that we agreed upon with the federal government and First Nations was necessary for at least 150 breeding pairs of spotted owl. So we know that the limitations right now on the reintroduction of spotted owl is not habitat, given the vast size. That is close to 700 Stanley Parks of old-growth forest. Lastly is the reintroduction of those spotted owls. We had an introduction just last year, and we have, with great humility and determination, introduced more spotted owls. We need the humility to understand that this is the first time this has ever been done in the world. We need the determination to keep doing it with our partners to make sure that owls are reintroduced successfully and breed in the wild on their own with the necessary habitat protection which we've set aside. Thank you.
Leader of the third party supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Let's be clear that what this province considers to be spotted owl habitat are areas that have been logged, that continue to be logged, and areas that are used for target practice, which I do not think contributes to the success of spotted owl reintroduction. Of the 3 owls that were introduced by this captive breeding program, 2 of them died and a third was found injured and had to return home. This government continues to approve logging in old-growth habitat that spotted owl would need to survive. It's evident that the status quo approach is not working. This government promised to bring in endangered species legislation. They failed to deliver. While they hum and haw, the list of at-risk species in the province grows and iconic species blink out. My question, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Water, Land, Resource Stewardship. Will the Minister ensure that we see species at-risk legislation before the next election?
Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me start with the end of my friend's question, and she would look forward, as we all have, as we've been building the biodiversity and ecosystem health framework with partners, particularly First Nations partners, who have been working with us every step of the way to introduce a framework as the first phase. And we expect that quite soon. And this will be an important structure for us, Mr. Speaker, in dealing with the serious question of species at risk and, of course, the habitat that needs to be protected in order to allow those species to thrive once again in British Columbia. I would say, however, that I contend greatly with the 280,000 hectares of old-growth habitat that have been set aside. This was agreed to jointly between ourselves, Canada, and First Nations as the critical habitat that would allow, as I said, 150 breeding pairs to exist. I have faith in our partnerships with the Spuzin First Nations and Canada in the determination of that old-growth habitat, not described as the member did. I think that is incorrect. I think it is important to remain determined, to remain hopeful and focused on the habitat required to allow these species to be reintroduced successfully so that we can all celebrate their critical return to our province. Thank you.
House Leader of the Fourth Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of British Columbia has been straight up with British Columbians about where we stand on the carbon tax. When we form government, we're going to axe the carbon tax to make life more affordable for everyday British Columbians. On the other hand, the BC United Liberals have taken a different approach. They continue to flip-flop themselves into obscurity on this and other issues. Yesterday, they're supporting it. Today, they're cancelling it. Tomorrow, well, I guess they'll wait for a poll or see what we, the Conservative Party, will do. Mr. Speaker, at least this NDP government is clear with voters. They're clear with voters. They want the average British Columbian to suffer, to pay more, and to go without. Mr. Speaker, this NDP government refuses to stand up for everyday hardworking British Columbians, like blue-collar workers who can't afford the NDP carbon tax, healthcare heroes who've chosen not to take a shot, and homeowners who are watching this government rip away their property rights. Mr. Speaker, I got all day. Mr. Speaker, Question to this NDP Premier. When he found out that Ottawa was forcing this unfair double standard on British Columbians, why did he choose to cower instead of pushing back? Why is it that under this NDP government, British Columbians always pay more to get less, while Eastern Canadians are getting a badly needed break?
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you to the member opposite for the question. Let's just go back to yesterday for one brief moment, because I want to acknowledge again his acknowledgement that climate change is real. But I do want to note that he did stop short of acknowledging the overwhelming scientific consensus that climate change is caused by human activity, like carbon emissions. So the leader of the Conservatives, as we know, was ejected from the BC United Caucus for suggesting that carbon emissions were not the cause of climate change. So today, Mr. Speaker, I want to give the member an opportunity to state not only that climate change is happening, but that it is caused by human activity. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the minister for deflecting the question. You know, it takes courage to stand for something and to lead. Something the leader of the BC United Liberals is sorely lacking, I will add. Mr. Speaker, this NDP Premier has no problem bullying the little guy who can't fight back. Healthcare workers, police officers, homeowners, and even municipal voters and governments. Mr. Speaker, this NDP Premier refuses to stand up to the bigger guy. He only wants to punch down. It's no wonder British Columbians are yet again getting the short end of the stick from Ottawa and this government. Mr. Speaker, my question to the NDP Premier: why won't this Premier stand up to Justin Trudeau on the carbon tax? Why won't he fight and demand equality and deliver it to British Columbians who are desperately needing a break?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, I noticed that he declined to answer my question, but we'll let that go for now. And again, I just want to remind him that the carbon tax is something that has been shown by experts around the world as one of the most efficient and effective means of reducing emissions. So, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue this work here in British Columbia, but we're going to do it with a people focus. And that means supporting people in the choices to make that switch from fossil fuel emissions into low emission technologies by supporting them in their pocketbook. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to provide rebates for electric vehicles, for heat pumps, for doors, for windows, for insulation, for the things that make the cost of energy, their home heating bills, more affordable. But, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to let it go that the federal government's made a decision about Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to push hard on the federal government to do what's right for all Canadians, and that is to help us make it more affordable for British Columbians to make the choices we know they want to make. We're not going to stop this work, no matter what the member opposite has to say. Thank you.
Member for Skeena.
Mr. Speaker, everybody on this side of the House, including past members of the BC United Party, supported the carbon tax in 2008. Previous members that are now part of the Fourth Party voted 7 times in favor of the carbon tax. And I can see why. It was never meant to be a tax grab like what it is under the NDP government right now. And in 2008 to 2017, it produced results. Emissions went down in BC. Emissions are going up under the NDP. And newsflash, it's going to go even higher. Because natural gas is going to burn natural gas to produce electricity. It's going to go higher. Admit it. In the meantime, British Columbians are suffering through the worst affordability crisis in BC's history. On the weekend, 7 cold weather records were shattered. And what's the Premier's response? More carbon tax. making it too expensive for people to heat their homes. A new report shows heating bills are gutting family budgets, forcing 1 in 7 households to make the cruel choice between warmth and necessities like food and medicine. Will the Premier finally admit the brutal choices that the NDP has chosen are forcing families to suffer even more, or will he continue to leave them out in the cold to pad his budget with billions more in carbon tax revenue?
Minister of Energy and Mines.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. There's one thing that the opposition has right. People and families are feeling the sting of high inflation, and people need support. But how you do it and who you do it for matters. So let's remember, this is the government, it's this government. We reverse the opposition's tax breaks for those at the top and use that money to reduce the cost for people. When he was on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition hiked ICBC rates by 11%, but under our government, drivers have received an average of $420 of rebates and a savings of $500 a year on their rates. When the opposition was on this side of the House, not only did they keep MSP premiums, but they raised them 10%, forcing people who pay $50,000 to pay the same as people making $500,000. That's unfair, and we ended it. So, Mr. Speaker, unlike the opposition who raises fees on people, we will continue to find ways to support people, to help them with the costs, because we know that's how we build a strong province for everybody.
Member for Skinner Supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, since 2017, taxes have been risen for British Columbians by $20 billion. You're making life tougher with your increased taxes. And now you purport to make it easier by giving some back, a little bit. But let's talk about making life easier in terms of the 2% of the friends of this House. LNG Canada was given the largest PST tax break in BC history. All we're asking is to give citizens of BC the same break. They were given a break on the carbon tax at $30 a ton, which is something at this side of the House when we were in government froze it at, because we realized it meant something good for the people of British Columbia. What do we see with this NDP government? Let's crank it up. In an affordability crisis, let's make it worse for British Columbians.
Except for the big
Except for big corporations. Talk about being Halloween. Jeez. British Columbians are drowning in taxes from this NDP government. And while people in other provinces catch a break, this Premier only piles on more taxes. The Premier's budget reveals a plan to ratchet up the carbon tax year after year, tripling the carbon tax. Don't be fooled. The NDP have a plan to gut family incomes by a staggering $11,000 annually. Why is the Premier making life increasingly unaffordable for British Columbians through his relentless carbon tax hikes?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. And my colleagues have already shared some of the initiatives that we're doing to ensure that people have more money in their pockets during these really challenging times. But, Honourable Speaker, what we've heard not only today, but throughout this session, is this consistent flip-flopping from the Leader of the Opposition. When it comes to story police transition, saying something in the South Asian media, and then coming here and doing something different. Short-term legislation, Honourable Speaker, voting in favour of it, and then the Conservatives vote against it, and then flip-flopping. When it comes to harm reduction.
Members, please.
Honourable Speaker, when it comes to harm reduction, we saw the same thing. When it comes to safe consumption sites, we saw them flip-flopping after the Conservatives did something else. Honourable Speaker, I want to remind the Leader of the Opposition of when he had very principled positions when it came to carbon tax. In 2012, this is what he had to say. I think canceling the carbon tax, my personal opinion, is that it would be a terrible mistake. I think that people believe that climate change is an issue and that warming of the planet is an issue, and the only sensible way to deal with that, I believe, is carbon pricing. That's the only way you're going to change behavior. Honourable Speaker, there's more. On Voice of BC.
Members, it's okay to let the minister answer.
Honourable Speaker, on Voice of BC.
Please.
Honourable Speaker, on Voice of BC, he said, I really believe that if you're genuinely concerned about climate change and you genuinely want to do something about it, pricing carbon is absolutely the right thing to do. He didn't end there. He went on with another reporter saying, we knew it wasn't going to be particularly popular, but I think in politics, at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to try to do the right thing or the easy thing, Honourable Speaker. So, Honourable Speaker, I don't know what the BC United Party leader believes anymore, but I know one thing, he'll do anything to get elected.
The bill ends the question period. Members, the question period is over. The chair would like to encourage all sides when they're asking a question or answering, be brief as much as you can, because then we would have more time for questions. Thank you very much. Question period is now over. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call second reading on Bill 37, Crime Victim Assistance Act. In the Douglas Fir Committee room, I call Committee of the Whole for Bill 29, Environmental Management Amendment Act. And in the third House, Committee Room C, I call Committee of the Whole for Bill 31, Emergency and Disaster Management Act.
Committee chairs.
The House will come to order. Take your Barbie conversations outside. Thank you. Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I move that Bill 37 now be read a second time. Honourable Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise today to speak about Bill 37, the Crime Victim Assistance Amendment Act 2023. The Crime Victim Assistance Program is a key component of the network of support for victims in our province. Its mandate is to support the recovery of of victims, immediate family members, and witnesses impacted by violent crime. The benefits available through the Crime Victim Assistance Program include financial and other benefits that address a range of needs for those recovering from physical and psychological injuries. For example, medical expenses and counseling services. There are also benefits available to immediate family members when a crime results in the death of a victim, for example, funeral expenses. The program is guided by the Crime Victim Assistance Act and 2 corresponding regulations. The Act has not been amended since it was introduced in 2002, and there are now gaps and barriers to eligibility that impact the program's ability to support those it was created to assist. This bill eliminates barriers to eligibility experienced by grandparents and grandchildren, witnesses, and those experiencing significant trauma in the immediate aftermath of crime through changes that reflect a more trauma-informed approach. Grandparents and grandchildren are not currently eligible for benefits unless they were financially dependent on the victim. This is a significant barrier that often results in benefits being denied. The bill removes the required financial dependence and, going forward, will improve the responsiveness to the increasing number of multi-generational households in our province. This change recognizes the vital role that grandparents play in supporting family systems and the significance of relationships between grandparents and grandchildren. The current definition of witness in the legislation is very narrow and requires that a witness had a strong emotional attachment to the victim. This excludes a significant number of those who witness a violent crime, including in their communities. Removing the requirement that there was a strong emotional attachment to the victim, expanding the circumstances in which witnesses are eligible to apply, and eliminating the need for a formal diagnosis of psychological harm will enable better support for witnesses of violent crime going forward. The current 1-year limit for submitting an application to the Crime Victim Assistance Program presents a barrier to prospective applicants who are experiencing trauma or dealing with multiple challenges in the immediate aftermath of a violent crime. This legislation will increase the time limit from 1 year to 2 years, which is the time limit for civil claims in BC. It reflects a more trauma-informed approach and aligns our province with other jurisdictions across the country who administer similar programs. Honourable Speaker, these amendments create flexibility to consider the long-term best interests of clients when pursuing the statutory obligation to recover costs from a judgment or settlement received as a result of a crime, and the flexibility to consider on a case-by-case basis other circumstances where it may be appropriate to suspend financial benefits for a period of time. The bill improves administrative processes by expanding support available for those who are physically or mentally incapable of making an application and don't have a legal representative. The changes also clarify and modernize language in the statute, including references to gendered language. These legislative amendments have been informed by engagement with a broad scope of partners, including Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners across the anti-violence sector. The Ministry considered Section 3 of the Declaration Act, as well as UN Declaration Articles 19 and 22 in its approach to consultation. This bill addresses significant barriers to eligibility. It improves the program's trauma-informed approach and strengthens the support available to victims, their immediate family members, and witnesses impacted by violent crime that may occur in our province. I am aware of concerns that have been raised regarding the growing gap between the cost of benefit rates, such as counselling services, and the funding amount available through the Crime Victim Assistance Program for these services. We are actively examining these issues. This legislation enables our government to develop recommendations to address this issue, and it is my intention to propose regulatory amendments later this fall. Honourable Speaker, I think this is an important bill which will improve the situation and the ability to access benefits for people who have been victims of crime in our province, and I look forward to the following debate and comments from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Recognizing the member for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for the mute. It's been a while since I've been on the screen. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak to Bill 37, the Crime Victim Assistance Amendment Act. This bill aims to improve the accessibility and delivery of benefits for victims of crime in British Columbia, removing barriers and recognizing the value of extended family. So let me begin by saying that we recognize the need to provide more support and assistance to victims of crime, especially as serious crime has increased in BC in recent years. In BC, services and people are available to help victims and those close to them with the emotional, physical, and financial effects of crime, and we are proud of that. This bill is fairly straightforward, so does not require a long debate from our perspective, but we will have some questions of government to make sure that the changes are balanced and reasonable. When we look at any changes or expansions of services, we have to ensure also that the nonprofits providing services on behalf of government are fully supported in order to be able to do so. We need to provide victims with emotional, financial, and practical support for those who have experienced crime, helping them cope with the trauma and aftermath of victimization. Bill 37 purports to expand and clarify these services. In examining the bill, we do have some reservations that lie with the implementation of funding of this bill. Now, while government claims that the legislation will make these critical services available to more people, we wonder how this can be achieved without increasing the budget for the Crime Victim Assistance Program. For 2 years, funding for CVAP has remained stagnant, even as crime rates and violence have surged in our province. So the minister can anticipate a number of questions, such as, how can we anticipate an expanded service delivery for victims of crime without increasing the program's financial resources? How will the government guarantee the service quality and promptness when faced with heightened demand? And most importantly, how can they guarantee that victims of crime will not face long wait times, bureaucratic hurdles, or inadequate support? In January of 2022, there were approximately 1,217 people on a wait list to access CFAP services. And if these changes expand access and not expand the funding and the capacity of those organizations delivering these services, what will happen with managing an already long wait list? And are we sure that all those eligible for services are aware of what is available? One of the services that victims of crime are eligible for under CVAP counseling is counseling. These services are essential for helping victims cope with trauma and stress caused by crime. Right now, more than ever, Mr. Speaker, we do have an appreciation of the value and the benefit of timely and experienced counseling for victims of crime. And having that counseling available sooner than later, not having to be on a long wait list, is critical to help people deal with the trauma and what could be a worse than lifelong experience because they didn't get early supports. And these services in respect to counseling from registered professionals are only available from registered professionals who are approved by CFAP. This means that victims of crime have limited options when it comes to choosing a counselor who meets their needs and preferences. And it's no secret that there's a shortage of mental health professionals in our province. And we also know that there are even fewer professionals who are actually approved by CFAP. This creates an additional barrier for victims of crime who need timely and appropriate counseling services. Compensation, Mr. Speaker, is also an issue for these counselors as government rate is set so far below the market rate. The competition for counselors and for their time is significant. Crime victim assistance programs play a vital role in addressing the needs of victims, promoting justice, and contributing to safer, more informed communities. Honorable Speaker, the government must consider these issues and challenges and consult with victims of crime, service providers, and stakeholders on how to improve the CFAP and ensure its sustainability. Additionally, we must ensure the allocation of funds for CVAP are carried out in a transparent and accountable manner. So I do look forward to examining the details of this bill further in committee stage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will figuratively take my seat.
Thank you, member. Recognizing member for Saanich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nice to see you in the chair, and would prefer not to be joining via my computer screen. However, it's the way it has to be today. Happy to stand and or to sit and respond to Bill 37, the Crime Victims Assistance Amendment Act, here at second reading. Look, I think just broadly, the Crime Victims Assistance Act is very limited in scope. Only some people are served by the program, and more support is needed. And so we in the third party are celebrating the changes that are made by this act, and we agree that these changes are long overdue. We appreciate the addition of grandparents and grandchildren to the expanded definition of family members, and we are appreciative that the definition of witness is also being expanded. However, we believe that the legislation needs to go further. I've heard from many constituents who have shared their frustrations with the Crime Victims Assistance Program, where in our constituency office we are dealing with these issues currently. Children who are victims of crime still have many barriers to accessing comprehensive services. And if the victim of a crime is an adult, there are a number of supports the CVAP is able to accommodate and provide. Yet children who are victims of crime under their families are unable to access the same level of support. Just recently wrote a letter to the minister, and I want to read it into the record here because I think that it's a bit curious to me as to why these amendments to this legislation are coming forward without providing greater support for children who are victims of serious crimes. The government knows that these gaps exist in the legislation, and so it's inexplicable to me that the Minister of Solicitor General and Public Safety would stand to table amendments and still leave children outside the protection and supports that are provided by the Crime Victims Services Program. This is the contents of my letter to the Solicitor General. I'm writing in response to concerns that have been raised with our office regarding the Crime Victim Services Program and the limitations that are preventing essential supports from being provided in a timely and effective manner. It seems particularly important to raise these concerns considering Bill 37, the Crime Victim Assistance Amendment Act, tabled earlier this session, one that we're debating today. The CVSP exists with the intent to assist, quote, victims, immediate family members, and some witnesses in coping with the effects of violent crime. It provides financial benefits to help offset financial losses and assist in recovery, end quote. While I wish to recognize the importance of this program, it feels necessary to raise specific concerns that have been brought to my attention to ensure that this service provides the meaningful and comprehensive support that victims of crime require. These specific concerns broadly relate to 1, supports for children and families, and 2, access to services. With respect to regarding supports for children and their families who are victims of crime, it has been made clear to our office that the CVSP is inadequately provisioned to support children and their families in the wake of crime. Below, I've identified several examples that outline apparent insufficiencies in the present system. The CVSP legislation does not cover family counseling. Family counseling can be an essential support to assist families and a child that was a victim of crime to navigate the recovery. Economic losses for immediate family members are not covered. When an adult experiences financial loss as an immediate consequence of a crime or in recovering from the effects of a crime, the CVSP will cover portions of those losses. For families that incur economic losses to support their child in the wake of a crime, example is time off work, there are no supports provided. While an option exists to sue the offender, this is an additional step that can require the child to be involved in the proceedings. This may not be possible or may cause unnecessary distress for a child. Items that are purchased to allow immediate family members to support a child do not appear to be eligible for coverage. Items that would normally be covered for adults to, quote, assist in recovery, end quote, are not eligible for coverage if parents are using them to support their child. Compensation for counseling is very limited. Often the cost of obtaining appropriate practitioners that are specialized to work with children and address specific traumatic experiences far exceeds the cost covered by the CVSP. It should be noted that here as well that any administrative costs associated with counselors or psychologists are not covered, and these expenses can be significantly higher when they pertain to children. Regarding access to services, it seems self-evident that being able to access supports as needed is essential to effective recovery. Unnecessary delays and barriers to accessing more care more generally should therefore be avoided where possible. Two concerns that have been raised with our office regarding access to services follow. Coverage of many services occur through reimbursement and is not provided up front. Many services that are covered by the CBSP, such as counseling, are reimbursed eventually, but the individual is required to pay for those services up front. Frequently, these upfront costs can be a substantial burden for individuals and act as a barrier to accessing services. Getting approval for services can be a lengthy process. Our office has been made aware of situations in which approval for services such as counseling have been delayed months. As acknowledged above, the CBSP plays an important role in helping victims of crime navigate their recovery. However, it is in recognizing the value of such a program that I feel obligated to raise concerns about the current limitations of the CBSP and push for a more comprehensive service that supports the diversity of individuals requiring support. So that's the end of my letter, Mr. Speaker, and I think that it is important that when the minister stands to speak to this bill, he explained why it is that these gaps remain even after opening this bill for some amendments that we broadly support, Mr. Speaker. I think he needs to explain why it is that this bill is silent on those issues. Further, I want to just raise the point about how the funding model works and access to funding and the reimbursement model in particular. There is no doubt that this will have a disproportionate impact on those victims of crimes that cannot afford to pay for their services, their counseling services and other services up front. It is going to be increasingly unlikely for families that are marginal, can marginally afford to pay for these services, to go and get those services if they know that the money that they are putting out up front is not going to come back in a reasonable amount of time. Indeed, if there's no way for them to plan, and there are several months in between the time that they submit their receipts for reimbursement and actually get the funds reimbursed, in the time that we are right now, where folks are struggling to just make ends meet and folks are struggling to pay the bills, this is going to be incredibly challenging for those families to take care specifically, and I want to focus here specifically on their children. However, this is a problem that appears to be more broadly applicable within this service. There has to be a better way to do this, and I agree with the member of the opposition, the member from West Vancouver, Capilano, who noted, and even as I expand in my speech the number of people that may be able to apply for these funds, to expand the scope of this without expanding the budget, to think that you're going to get better results stretching a budget that has already been deemed to be inappropriate or to lack the scale of the problem that we're facing, the entire system just continues to get more stressed out. So I certainly hope that in budget 24, this minister gets to celebrate an increase in the crime victim services program funding, because otherwise we're going to do this good work by making the legislation or updating the legislation, but the actual victims of crimes in our province aren't going to receive the benefit of that. The only benefit that would be deemed from that would be of the minister and the government, who get to stand and claim that they made the legislative changes. But without the funding, it's not actually going to support or benefit the people who actually need it. And we implore the government to come up with a different system than this reimbursement system, which really, really disproportionately impacts those who can least afford it. The most vulnerable, marginalized in our society are less likely to go and get those services if they know that this system is inefficient and doesn't doesn't reimburse them in a prompt way. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the minister about the reasons why he left children out of these amendments. And as well, there are some pretty serious questions that we have around Section 6 of this bill. We'll be having those conversations in the upcoming stages of debate. And with that, I take my seat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Chilliwack Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor to rise today to talk about the Crime Victim Assistance Act, the amendments happening and being debated right now. I rise for a very specific purpose, not only to talk about what these amendments would mean, what this legislation would mean, but also to reflect back on the voices who contributed to it. I know that there are so many of my colleagues here, so many of the team in PSSG, so many advocates, so many people in nonprofits working the front line who carry the stories of the people who impacted these changes, who inform the work that we do when we talk about victims. Honorable Speaker, I had the experience, because it's hard to classify what kind of experience it was. I guess the privilege and the experience of working as a victim support worker for several years, working as a caseworker, and the stories that I heard there and how they would be impacted by these changes in this piece of legislation. I can see the direct line. Now, that was many years ago. These changes, these updates, these improvements have been a long time coming, but I can't help but think of the people I sat across from at a desk hearing about the needs, helping them fill out applications for supports and services, helping to connect them with supports and services that are discussed in this act. I can't help but remember sitting on a bench in a courtroom as they waited perhaps to testify, as they waited for more information from the courts. And so I want to really start the conversation here, just acknowledging that it's because victims of crime, it's because of families who have experienced incredible loss and trauma that inform the work that is being done. And I want to say thank you. Nothing can ever turn the clock back enough to make it okay. But because people shared their experiences, because they were open about the gaps, because they continue to advocate not only for themselves but for others, that's how we can make improvements. And at a time where people are dealing with their own loss, their own trauma, their own experiences, that's a gift and not one we should be able to expect. So I want to raise my hands to all of the victims and the victims advocates who helped bring us here and who will help make it better, make us better as we move forward. I know that this is one of the steps that we're taking to support victims. This is a step to close critical gaps in legislation. It's seeking to ensure that British Columbians who have experienced crime, who are survivors, who may have witnessed crime, or maybe are immediate family members of a victim, that they can receive the support that will assist in their healing journey, in their recovery, and to offset financial costs. One of the things that I experienced as I walked alongside survivors and victims as a support worker is it's expensive to be traumatized, Honorable Speaker. It's expensive to be victimized. And that is just insult to injury. I appreciate that that can't be resolved without actually just resolving the act to begin with, without resolving the action to begin with, to not be creating more victims. This closes some gaps in that. This takes us a step better. And when I read the actions from this piece of legislation that's before us, I hear the echoes of survivors and victims and their families of what about this, and the gaps that why can't I have this help? Why can't I get this support? And here I see that many of these gaps have been directly addressed. When the amendments to the Crime Victim Assistance Act were introduced, it was explained that it was to expand eligibility and improve access for victim survivors and families of victims. The goal is to provide greater access to services like counseling. Now, when I initially read it, and I read about grandparents and grandchildren, I'm not going to lie, I don't know, as politicians, as members here in this House, we may have a lot of people who think a lot of different things about the humans who stand up here. But it caught me right in my chest because I distinctly remember a situation where I was supporting extended family of a victim, the parents and the child of a victim of gender-based violence, as a matter of fact. And they had lost their life. And I remember there were gaps. It was hard to know what services I could get them because the grandparents of the child of the victim were absolutely not financially dependent on the victim. It changed the dynamic of what supports were available. This addresses that. If past grandparents and grandchildren, we're removing the requirement that they're financially dependent on the victim in order to access. That's a big change because I remember these people. I remember we were sitting in a park, and I remember they had just lost their child. They were trying to figure out how to provide what their grandchild needed, and it was a struggle. And so as we stand up in this House, not just politicians, not just wearing blazers, not just wearing pins and doing the formal things of legislature, as we stand up as human beings who have supported other human beings, I want, maybe with this piece of legislation more than quite a few recently, this one, I see the faces of the people and I hear the voices of the people. In my role as Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity, Honourable Speaker, I'm also working closely with PSSG regarding the Gender-Based Violence Action Plan. And we know that disproportionately, people accessing this service are dealing with issues of sexualized violence, gender-based sexualized violence. Again, there's no undoing that. And there are not any services in the world that will make it okay. There are not any supports in the world that will undo it or bring you back to the time before. Counseling is critical. And one of the things that I truly appreciate is not only the extension from 1 year to 2 years for people to be able to apply for benefits, but something that not everybody knows, Honourable Speaker, which is in the cases of sexual assault, there's no time limit there. And I think that's important to note, not a change, but we'll say related to the legislation in front of us, because I think that's important to know as in our offices or even just as human beings with the people we love. Statistically, we probably love somebody who will be or has been the victim of sexual violence, gender-based violence, and so I want that to be a fact that we all have embedded in our minds. So it extends the time limit for making an application for service from 1 year to 2 years, keeping in mind the exception for sexual assault, so that people can seek help when they're ready. And that really aligns with other factors, other pieces of timing. So I think that that's a really big win, because when something happens, we might not be ready to take those next steps. There's a lot going on. It also, if passed, it will ensure that those who are traumatized by witnessing violent crime firsthand in their communities are eligible for support. And it does that by expanding the definition of victim. I think that's really important because as it was, or as it is, I guess, before this is passed, the definition of witnesses that could access services was very narrow. And I understand why. We wanted to make sure that we were targeting, that we were giving supports to people who needed the most, absolutely. But as communities, if you witness a crime, especially certain kinds of crime, that will change you. That will change you, it will change your relationships. And Honorable Speaker, just in a related way, people, especially children who witness violence, who witness abuse, are more likely to later on perpetrate that, repeat what they've seen, what they've learned there. It creates a trauma, so I am so encouraged by the change that's being proposed here that we'll be debating. And I appreciate my colleagues across the aisle and what they've said, the questions that they'll ask. And the way I see it is every question asked is a question asked on behalf of a victim. And I trust that that will be the spirit that it will be done in, because I know the depth of commitment we all have here for victims of crime, for their families. One of the things that I think is really important to understand as well is the Crime Victim Assistance Program is funded by the very people who cause harm to others. And I think that that's something that's important for us to know as we're considering the changes that are necessary in order to support people who are harmed. Expanding the definition of people who qualify, because we understand that things have changed. We know better about certain aspects of what causes trauma and what the damage that comes from that. We haven't significantly amended, as was mentioned, this act since 2002. Our understanding of gender-based violence, our understanding of sexualized violence, our understanding of the trauma and what happens as a result of that trauma, all of those things have expanded. And I am so very encouraged that we're making sure that these amendments are made. But Honorable Speaker, it won't stop there. We continue to hear from victims, from advocates, from families, from survivors. And for this particular legislation, I know there was consultation done that was critical, and it was done with the First Nations communities, it was done with Indigenous communities, because, Honorable Speaker, we know that Indigenous women are overrepresented when it comes to gender-based violence, sexualized violence. We know this. And so the consultations done are incredibly important. This is one step, one piece of work that is impactful and that it echoes the advocacy that we have seen, we have heard, we have sat with these people on benches and at tables. I hear victim voices in this, and I am so grateful. It's not the last piece of work we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of State for Childcare, I believe.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill, and I want to appreciate the comments by the member from Chilliwack, Kent, recognizing and uplifting the voices that are behind the changes that you see in this legislation, that were the force behind moving towards amendments that we need to see. It doesn't come as a surprise, but this legislation's very important to me in this work. Part of my pathway to this place was through anti-violence work and working with survivors who need to be able to access supports, whose families often need to be able to access supports. And Mr. Speaker, these are the first substantive amendments to the Crime Victim Assistance Act in over 20 years. We have learned a lot about trauma. We've learned a lot about the impacts of violence in those 20 years. And these amendments are really crucial for changing that legislation to better fit what we know that people need. Mr. Speaker, one of the amendments that I'm especially happy to see in this legislation is the change to no longer require that family members are financially dependent on a victim of crime to access supports. I have trouble thinking of any other word than cruel behind that kind of qualification. What does it say about how we value people and their wellness? To me, it says something about valuing people's productivity, their income, their financial contribution. But we know that the impacts of violence and the impacts of crime ripple out to families and to communities. And to remove that criteria so that people are able to access the support they need when they lose someone to crime, based on their emotional connection, based on the impact of the crime, not on their financial dependence on someone, is to me a huge step forward. I also think the change to increase the time limit is compassionate, but it also reflects what we know about the impacts of trauma and sometimes the time people need to be able to then seek help and support. In my previous work, both in and outside this House, the call for these changes, the call for us collectively to recognize the limitations of the Crime Victim Assistance Act were loud and frequent from both survivors, but also the community organizations that support them. Police-based victim services, community-based victim services included. And I think that we're responding to that call and, as I said, responding to what we know about the impacts of trauma on people. I also think that I also want to thank the Minister for the amendment that is removing the need of witnesses to have close emotional ties to victims. As the member for Chilliwack-Kent says, witnessing a crime can change people. And being able to access the supports and services that can help them heal and address that trauma are important. I also think we can't understate the benefits, not just to survivors, but to their families, to their communities, to the province, of healing people's trauma, of providing them with the supports they need. People aren't able to work, they're not able to parent, that can have real impacts on their ability to be members of their families and communities if they don't get the support they need. So by meeting people where they're at, by doing better with the amendments to this legislation, the positive impacts will ripple out from there. I heard the members from the opposite side and the third party speak, and I think we can recognize that the amendments to this legislation don't solve all the challenges in and of themselves, and that they're important steps. But I think we can also recognize what comes along with these amendments. The day that this legislation, that these amendments were introduced, the member for Chilliwack-Kent, the Minister for Public Safety were also announcing the addition of sexual assault centres. These places where survivors can access integrated services, can access integrated clinics, or they can receive emotional support, in some cases medical care, forensic exams, options for police reporting, all in one safe, accessible, trauma-informed location. This is a game changer for survivors that removes the need for survivors to go to a hospital where they may face barriers to accessing care, but also due to trauma may not feel safe going. And then perhaps go to a police station to file a report if they wish. The announcement of integrated spaces in Surrey, in Kamloops, in Prince George, in Vancouver, and here in Victoria, alongside these amendments, speak to the commitment to doing right by survivors, to delivering the services that they need, and to the ongoing work before us. Mr. Speaker, there's also additional work to do on this legislation, and I know that the Minister of Public Safety continues to look at the regulations that go with this legislation to address some of the challenges, again, long-standing challenges that have impacted survivors' ability to access the services they need, that have impacted the ability of family members, of witnesses to get adequate support. And I commend the Minister of Public Safety for looking at those regulations at the same time as these amendments to the legislation are up for consideration. Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat with that, but just to express gratitude to those doing this work in and outside the House and on the ground in community, and support this legislation.
Thank you, Member. Seeing no further speakers, Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the House for speaking to this important piece of legislation. It is a bill that builds on work that has been done within my ministry in identifying what gaps there are in terms of assistance for victims of crime. I think it's very crucial that we look at how we treat individuals who've been victims of crime and the supports that we're able to give them, being able to expand them. The idea that you have to have a strong emotional attachment to the victim in order to be considered for assistance when you witness a crime, I think is something that is long overdue in terms of being dealt with. Likewise, recognizing the role of the family, that it is not just the parents, for example, but siblings, grandparents, grandchildren. All of those things, all of those family relationships, the extended family are important, and this bill addresses those. As my colleague who spoke before me indicated, the regulations will be developed, and there's work being done on that. And I look forward to that work and to putting in place regulations to help further, and not just clarify, but to improve the system that we have in place. This particular legislation, I think, is important. I've enjoyed hearing the comments that members on both sides have made about the bill, and I look forward to further explanation or further work in committee stage and getting the bill passed. And so with that, Honourable Speaker, I move second reading. Thank you.
You already moved it before, but that's okay. Members, the question is second reading of those of Bill 37. Those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. It's carried. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move that the bill be committed or referred to a committee of the whole House for the next sitting of the House after today.
Members, you've heard the question. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call Bill 39, Zero Emissions Vehicle Act, and I call a brief 2-minute recess.
We'll have a 2-minute recess. Do I hear 10? We'll have a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Calling the House back to order. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Section A reports progress on Bill 29 and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again? Government House Leader.
Next sitting, Speaker.
So ordered. Government House Leader. Oh, another committee chair. They're not here yet. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Section C reports progress on Bill 31 and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again? Government House Leader.
Next sitting, Speaker.
So ordered. Government House Leader.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Members, you heard the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m.